The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Clara Bennett stepped down onto the sun-baked earth of Redemption Creek, Montana territory, clutching the only possession that truly mattered to her, a small, worn Bible that had belonged to her mother. It was July 1879, and the afternoon heat shimmered off the wooden buildings lining the single main street of this frontier town, nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she smoothed her traveling dress, suddenly aware that somewhere in this collection of weathered structures stood the man she had agreed to marry through nothing more than a series of letters exchanged over 6 months. She had read Thomas Callahan's letters so many times the paper had grown soft as cloth. He owned a ranch outside town, raised cattle and horses, and needed a wife to help build a life in this harsh but beautiful country. Clara, orphaned at 22 and working as a seamstress in Philadelphia with barely enough to eat, had answered his advertisement with a mixture of desperation and hope. Now, standing in the Montana dust with the Bible pressed against her chest like a shield, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Miss Bennett." A deep voice cut through her swirling thoughts, and Clara turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the livery stable. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were an unexpected shade of blue-green, like a mountain lake, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore dusty work clothes and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this rugged landscape. "Mr. Callahan." Clara managed to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Thomas Callahan removed his hat, revealing more of that wavy dark hair, and something shifted in his expression as he looked at her. Clara knew she was not a conventional beauty. Her auburn hair was too wild, her face too full of freckles, and her frame too slender from years of not quite getting enough to eat. But whatever Thomas saw in that moment made him smile, a slow, genuine smile that reached those remarkable eyes. "I am Thomas Callahan, yes," he said, his gaze dropping to the Bible she held. His smile widened, became something warmer and more personal. "Faith looks beautiful on you." The words were so unexpected, so different from what she had braced herself to hear, that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. In Philadelphia, her devotion to her mother's Bible had earned her mockery from the other seamstresses, who said religion would not fill an empty stomach. Here was a stranger, the man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry, and his first real words to her were a compliment that touched the deepest part of who she was. "Thank you," she whispered, and felt something loosen in her chest. "It was my mother's." Thomas's expression softened further. "Then it is doubly precious. Come, let me get your trunk. I imagine you are exhausted from the journey. We will go to the boarding house first so you can rest and freshen up. Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable place, and I have taken a room for you there. I thought perhaps we should take a few days to get acquainted before we visit the preacher." Clara had not expected such consideration. Many mail-order brides were married within hours of arrival, their grooms impatient to seal the arrangement. That Thomas was willing to give her time spoke to a thoughtfulness that his letters had hinted at, but which she had not quite dared to believe. As Thomas retrieved her small trunk from the stagecoach and loaded it onto a wagon hitched nearby, Clara took in her surroundings with growing curiosity. Redemption Creek was rougher than anything she had known in the city, but there was an honest vitality to it. Men in dusty work clothes moved in and out of the saloon across the street. Women in practical calico dresses carried baskets of goods from the general store. A blacksmith's hammer rang out from somewhere down the street. Everything smelled of dust and pine and horses and possibility. "It is not much like Philadelphia, I imagine," Thomas said as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. His hand was calloused, but his touch was gentle, steadying her with easy strength. "No," Clara admitted, "but Philadelphia held nothing for me but empty rooms and emptier prospects. I am grateful for the chance at something different." Thomas climbed up beside her and took the reins, guiding the horses down the street at an easy pace. "I will be honest with you, Miss Bennett. Life out here is hard. The winters are brutal, the summers can be just as harsh, and ranching is backbreaking work from dawn until well past dark. I cannot promise you luxury or ease, but I can promise you honesty, respect, and a partner who will work alongside you to build something lasting." Clara looked at this man, who spoke with such straightforward sincerity, and felt her anxiety begin to transform into something else. Hope, perhaps, or the first stirrings of genuine interest. "That is more than I had any right to expect, Mr. Callahan. Your letters spoke of your character, but hearing you say it in person means a great deal more." "Thomas," he said. "Please call me Thomas. And I hope in time you will let me call you Clara." "Clara is fine," she said softly. "I think formality seems rather silly given that we are meant to marry." Thomas shot her a sideways glance, and she saw humor dancing in those blue-green eyes. "You are not at all what I expected." "Oh." Clara felt a flutter of worry. "In what way?" "You are braver than I imagined," he said simply. "It takes courage to travel so far into unknown territory on nothing but letters and faith. I admire that." The boarding house was a two-story building painted white, with a wide porch and window boxes full of wildflowers that someone clearly tended with care. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a plump, practical woman in her 50s who showed Clara to a small but clean room on the second floor with a window overlooking the street. "Mr. Callahan is a good man," Mrs. Henderson said as she set fresh towels on the washstand. "Known him since he came to Redemption Creek 5 years ago. Works harder than anyone I have ever seen, and he is honest as the day is long. You could do far worse, dear." "I am beginning to see that," Clara said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Thomas had given her 2 days to rest and adjust before he came calling again, and Clara used that time to explore the town and begin to understand the world she had entered. She met the other women of Redemption Creek, a mixture of ranch wives, shopkeepers, and a schoolteacher named Sarah Tompkins who invited Clara to Sunday services at the small church on the edge of town. When Thomas arrived at the boarding house on the 3rd day, Clara was waiting on the porch, her Bible tucked into the pocket of her dress. He had cleaned up since their first meeting, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, and he had brought a bouquet of wildflowers that made Clara's heart squeeze with unexpected tenderness. "I thought you might like to see the ranch," Thomas said. "If you are going to make a decision about marrying me, you should know what you are getting into." The ride out to the Callahan Ranch took nearly an hour, following a winding trail through pine forest and across open meadows where cattle grazed in the summer sun. Thomas kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the land, his voice filled with a passion that Clara found utterly compelling. He loved this place, that much was clear, and he wanted to share that love with someone else. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy log house with a stone chimney sat in a clearing, surrounded by several outbuildings including a barn, a chicken coop, and a smokehouse. A vegetable garden had been started near the house, though it clearly needed more attention than Thomas could give it while managing the ranch alone. "It is not fancy," Thomas said, and Clara heard the uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it is mine, free and clear. I have been building this place for 5 years, and I have plans to expand. Good grazing land, access to water, and room to grow. But it is lonely work doing it all alone." Clara climbed down from the wagon and walked slowly around the clearing, taking in every detail. She saw the careful craftsmanship in the house, the way everything was built to last. She saw the potential in the garden, the good water from the well, the solid construction of the outbuildings. Most of all, she saw the evidence of a man who took pride in his work and built with the future in mind. "Show me the house," she said, turning back to Thomas. Relief flashed across his face and he led her inside. The interior was simple but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a small loft space that could be used for storage or eventually converted into additional sleeping quarters. Thomas had built most of the furniture himself, and while it was rough-hewn, it was sturdy and functional. Clara ran her hand over the heavy wooden table that dominated the kitchen area, imagining meals shared there, conversations held over morning coffee, a family growing up around it. She walked to the window and looked out at the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in July. "What do you think?" Thomas asked quietly from behind her. Clara turned to face him, and the vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. This strong, capable man was genuinely worried about what she thought, genuinely hoping she would see what he saw in this place. "I think," Clara said carefully, "that you have built something solid here, Thomas, something worth investing in. I think a woman would be fortunate to build a life in this place, with the right man." "And am I the right man, Clara?" The question was barely above a whisper. Clara had not expected to feel what she felt in that moment. She had come to Montana prepared for a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience that would provide her with security and him with a helpmate. She had not expected to feel this pull of attraction, this growing sense that Thomas Callahan might be someone she could genuinely love given time. "I believe you could be," she said honestly. "I barely know you, Thomas, but what I do know I like very much. You have been nothing but kind and respectful. You have shown me consideration I did not expect, and I can see you are a man of your word." Thomas crossed the room to stand before her, and Clara was intensely aware of his nearness, the warmth radiating from his body, the way he smelled of soap and leather and sunshine. "I want to do this right," he said. "I know you came here to marry me, but I do not want you to feel rushed or forced. Take whatever time you need to be sure." Clara looked up at him, at this good man who was offering her a choice when he had every right to expect immediate compliance with their arrangement. In that moment, she made her decision. "I do not need more time," she said. "I will marry you, Thomas Callahan, if you still want me." The joy that lit his face was answer enough, but Thomas being Thomas, he said the words anyway. "I want you, Clara. I have wanted you since I read your first letter, and I want you even more now that I have met you in person. You are everything I hoped for and more than I deserve." "Then we should speak to the preacher," Clara said, feeling her own smile grow to match his. They were married the following Sunday in the small church on the edge of town with Mrs. Henderson and Sarah Tompkins as witnesses and half the town in attendance, curious to see Redemption Creek's newest arrival wed to one of their most respected ranchers. Clara wore a simple dress that Sarah helped her alter, and she carried her mother's Bible instead of flowers. When Thomas took her hand and spoke his vows in a voice that rang with sincerity, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and stand beside you in all things," Thomas said, his eyes locked on hers. "I promise to build a life with you that honors both of us, and to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my world." Clara's own vows caught in her throat with emotion, but she managed to speak them clearly. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to support you and stand with you through whatever comes. I promise to bring faith and hope to our home, and to build a future with you that would make both our families proud." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart crack open with the first true stirrings of love. The wedding celebration at the boarding house was simple but joyful, with food and music and genuine warmth from the community welcoming Clara into their midst. Thomas never left her side, always touching her somehow, a hand at her waist or his arm around her shoulders, as though he could not quite believe she was real and his. As evening fell, they rode back to the ranch together, and Clara felt nervous anticipation flutter in her stomach. She was a virgin, knew little of what passed between husband and wife beyond whispered conversations overheard between married women. Thomas seemed to sense her anxiety because he took her hand as they entered the house and squeezed gently. "There is no rush for anything," he said quietly. "This is your home now, Clara, and I want you to feel safe here always." But Clara, having made her decision, did not want to wait. She turned to face Thomas in the lamplight, reached up to touch his face, and said, "I am your wife now, Thomas. I want to be your wife in all ways." What followed was tender and patient, Thomas taking infinite care with her innocence, whispering reassurances and praise until Clara's nervousness transformed into wonder and then into pleasure. They came together with a rightness that felt like grace, and afterward, lying in Thomas's arms in the darkness, Clara felt peace settle over her for the first time since her mother's death. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" Thomas's voice was drowsy content. "For making me feel chosen, not just convenient." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "You are chosen, Clara. Every day I will choose you." The days that followed established the rhythm of their married life. Thomas taught Clara the workings of the ranch, and she proved to be a quick study, unafraid of hard work. She took over the vegetable garden and expanded it, started tending the chickens, and learned to milk the cow Thomas kept for fresh dairy. She cooked hearty meals that Thomas praised extravagantly, made curtains for the windows, and slowly transformed the house into a true home. In turn, Thomas showed her the land he loved, taking her on rides through the mountains, teaching her to fish in the cold streams, pointing out wildlife and explaining the changing seasons. They talked endlessly, discovering each other's histories, dreams, and fears. Clara told Thomas about her childhood in Philadelphia, her mother's slow decline from illness, the desperate loneliness of working in the seamstress shop while trying to survive. Thomas spoke of growing up in Texas, losing his family to cholera, and heading north to start fresh in Montana territory where the land was still open and a man could build something lasting. But it was not all easy. The ranch work was indeed backbreaking, the hours long and exhausting. Clara's hands, unused to such labor, cracked and bled until they developed calluses. The isolation sometimes pressed on her, used as she was to city life. And there were moments when the sheer vastness of the Montana wilderness made her feel small and frightened. 3 months into their marriage, Clara woke one morning to find blood staining her nightgown, and she cried with disappointment despite knowing it was far too soon to expect a child. Thomas found her in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she scrubbed at the stain. "Clara, what is wrong?" He was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders. "I am not pregnant," she said, and heard the thickness in her own voice. "I know it is foolish to be upset, but I wanted so badly to give you a child." Thomas turned her to face him, cupped her face in his hands, and looked at her with such love that Clara's breath caught. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I did not marry you to be a brood mare. I married you because I wanted you, Clara, you exactly as you are. Children would be a blessing, yes, but you are the blessing I prayed for. Do not ever think your worth to me is tied to anything but yourself." Clara threw her arms around his neck and held on tight, feeling the strength of him, the solid reality of this man who loved her so completely. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I love you, Thomas." She felt him go still, and then his arms came around her like bands of iron, holding her so close she could barely breathe. "Say it again," he whispered roughly. "I love you," Clara repeated, pulling back to look at him. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you said faith looked beautiful on me, but I know it for certain now. I love you with everything I am." Thomas kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Clara tasted salt and realized he was crying. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet but blazing with joy. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach," he said. "Every day since has only made me love you more. You are my heart, Clara, my home, everything." They made love right there in the kitchen, urgent and passionate, and afterward Clara felt as though she was glowing from the inside out. They had become true partners, true lovers, bound by something deeper than convenience or arrangement. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Clara threw herself into preparing for winter with Thomas's guidance. They harvested the garden, stored vegetables in the root cellar, smoked meat, and chopped endless cords of firewood. Clara learned to can and preserve, filling shelf after shelf with jars of food that would sustain them through the brutal Montana winter. The first snow came in early November, and Clara stood at the window watching the flakes swirl down, feeling a moment of apprehension at the cold months ahead. But Thomas came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her head. "We will be fine," he said. "We have everything we need right here," and they did. The winter was indeed harsh, with temperatures dropping far below zero and snowdrifts piling higher than Clara's head. But inside the sturdy house Thomas had built, they were warm and safe. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other, Clara often choosing passages from her mother's Bible. They talked and laughed and made love and grew even closer in the enforced intimacy of winter isolation. It was in February, during the deepest cold, that Clara realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally saying anything to Thomas. They were sitting by the fire one evening, Clara mending one of his shirts, when she set down her needle and thread. "Thomas, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the piece of leather he was tooling, and something in her expression made him set aside his work immediately. "What is it?" "I believe I am with child," Clara said, and watched his face transform with wonder. "Truly?" He was across the room in an instant, kneeling beside her chair, his hands covering hers. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," Clara said. "My courses are 6 weeks late, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I did not want to say anything until I was sure." Thomas let out a whoop of joy that made Clara laugh, and then he was gathering her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing breathlessly. When he finally set her down, his face was alight with such happiness that Clara felt her own joy magnify tenfold. "We are going to have a baby," Thomas said wonderingly. "Clara, we are going to be parents." "We are," Clara agreed and felt tears of happiness spill down her cheeks. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Thomas laughed and kissed her. "I am beyond happy. I am blessed. We are blessed." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of planning and preparation. Thomas began work on a cradle, carving it from pine and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Clara started sewing baby clothes, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. They talked endlessly about names, about the future, about the life they would build for this child. When spring finally broke and the snow began to melt, revealing the greening land beneath, Clara was beginning to show, her belly rounding with their growing child. Thomas treated her like spun glass, constantly worried that she was overworking herself, but Clara refused to be coddled. "I am pregnant, not ill," she told him firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will not spend the next 4 months sitting idle." Still, Thomas insisted on hiring help for the ranch, bringing on a young man named Daniel Cooper to assist with the heavier work. Daniel was 18, fresh from the East himself, and eager to learn ranching. He was respectful and hardworking, and Clara was grateful for his presence because it meant Thomas worried about her less. As summer returned to Montana, Clara bloomed along with the wildflowers. She had never felt more alive, more purposeful. She and Thomas would sit on the porch in the evenings, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move. They marveled at the life they had created together, this tangible proof of their love. "What do you hope for?" Clara asked one evening as the sun set in a blaze of gold and pink. "A son or a daughter?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, his hand gentle on her stomach. "I hope for a healthy child and a safe delivery for you," he said finally. "That is all that matters to me. But if I am honest, I think I would love a daughter with your spirit and your faith." Clara felt her heart swell. "And I think I would love a son with your strength and your kindness. Then we will be happy either way," Thomas said and kissed her temple. The baby came in September, during the golden days of early autumn. Clara's labor started in the evening and lasted through the night and into the next day. Sarah Tompkins came to help, along with Mrs. Henderson and Thomas paced the porch outside, white-faced and terrified, while the women tended to his wife. It was hard, harder than anything Clara had ever endured. The pain was overwhelming, crushing, and there were moments when she was certain she could not survive it. But each time she felt herself faltering, she would hear Thomas's voice from outside, calling encouragement, and she would find the strength to push on. Finally, as afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom window, Clara gave one final, tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. The infant's cry rang out, lusty and strong, and Sarah laughed with joy. "It is a boy," Sarah announced. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated, and moments later Sarah placed the baby in her arms. He was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. Clara stared down at him in wonder, unable to believe this miracle she held. The door burst open and Thomas rushed in, his face wild with anxiety until he saw Clara sitting up, alive and well, holding their son. He stopped dead, his expression transforming into something Clara had no words for. "Clara," he breathed, moving to the bedside on shaking legs. "Are you all right?" "I am perfect," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Look, Thomas, look at our son." Thomas sank onto the edge of the bed and reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fingers. When those little fingers curled around his thumb, Clara watched her strong, capable husband break down and weep with joy. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Thomas Callahan, after Thomas's father. Jamie, as they quickly began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a pair of lungs that could wake the dead. Clara threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. And Thomas proved to be a devoted father, happily walking the floor with a crying infant at 3 in the morning, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with constant wonder. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but infinitely richer. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's careful management. They added more cattle, built an addition onto the house to give them more space, and slowly grew more prosperous. Clara started a small business selling eggs and vegetables in town, and the extra income allowed them to think about future expansion. Jamie grew from infant to toddler, a bright, energetic child with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's curiosity. Clara would often find Thomas and Jamie in the barn together, the boy chattering away while Thomas worked, explaining everything in patient detail despite his son's young age. When Jamie was 2, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with joy but also trepidation, remembering how difficult Jamie's birth had been. But this pregnancy proved easier, and when their second child came in the spring of 1883, the labor was shorter and less complicated. This time it was a daughter with auburn hair and dark eyes, and they named her Rose Margaret, after Clara's mother. If Clara had thought Thomas was devoted to Jamie, it was nothing compared to how completely their daughter wrapped him around her tiny finger. Thomas could deny Rose nothing, and Clara often had to be the voice of discipline while Thomas just melted at his daughter's smile. The years passed in the way of happy lives, quickly but richly. Jamie and Rose grew into bright, loving children who adored each other, despite the usual sibling squabbles. The ranch prospered, Thomas's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher growing throughout the territory. Clara became a respected member of the community, known for her generosity and her steadfast faith. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Clara back to the spot where they had first arrived at the ranch, that clearing where she had first seen their future home. The house had been expanded twice now, the outbuildings were numerous and well-maintained, and the whole place spoke of success and permanence. "You remember what you said that first day?" Thomas asked, his arm around her waist as they stood looking at all they had built. "I said you had built something solid," Clara replied, "something worth investing in." "You were the best investment I ever made," Thomas said, turning her to face him. The best decision I ever made. My life began the day you stepped off that stagecoach clutching your mother's Bible." Clara reached up to touch his face, this man she loved more than her own life. "And mine began when you saw that faith and called it beautiful. You have given me everything, Thomas. A home, a family, a purpose. You have given me love beyond measure." "We gave each other that," Thomas corrected. "We built this together, Clara. Every bit of it." And that was the truth, Clara reflected as Thomas kissed her there in the golden light of their Montana ranch. They had both come to Redemption Creek as broken, lonely people seeking something better. They had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found home. The Bible that Clara had carried from Philadelphia sat now on a shelf in their home, a reminder of where they had come from and the faith that had sustained them. She read from it often to their children, teaching them the values that had guided her through hardship and into joy. And sometimes, when she opened it, she would find Thomas watching her with that same expression he had worn 10 years ago when he had said faith looked beautiful on her. Montana Territory became Montana State in 1889, and the Callahan Ranch continued to grow and thrive. Jamie proved to have his father's gift for ranching, and his mother's head for business. Rose showed talent for healing and wanted to become a doctor, a dream that Clara and Thomas supported wholeheartedly despite the raised eyebrows from some of their more traditional neighbors. 2 more children joined the family over the years, another son named William and a daughter named Grace, and the house rang with laughter and life. There were hard times, certainly, droughts and harsh winters and the usual challenges of ranch life. But Clara and Thomas faced them together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each passing year. As Clara grew older, her auburn hair threaded with silver and her hands marked by years of hard work, she would sometimes sit on the porch in the evening and marvel at the life she had built. She thought of the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in 1879, alone except for a Bible and a desperate hope. She could never have imagined this future, this richness, this depth of love and purpose. Thomas still looked at her the way he had on their wedding day, with a devotion that made her heart flutter even after decades of marriage. He still reached for her hand, still whispered words of love, still treated her as though she was the most precious thing in his world. And Clara returned that love with every fiber of her being. When Jamie married a local rancher's daughter in 1895 and brought his bride to live on an adjoining property that Thomas helped him buy, Clara wept with joy at seeing her son so happy. When Rose headed east to medical school 2 years later, the whole family traveled to see her off, bursting with pride at her courage and determination. William showed talent for working with horses and started a breeding program that brought additional prosperity to the ranch. Grace, the baby, proved to be gifted with music and filled the house with piano melodies. In 1899, Thomas and Clara celebrated their 20th anniversary surrounded by their children and growing number of grandchildren. Jamie and his wife had given them 2 grandsons already, and another baby was on the way. The house that had once seemed so empty now overflowed with family, with love, with the tangible evidence of a life well lived. 20 years, Thomas said as they stood together watching their family gather for the celebration. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Forever would not be long enough, Clara replied, leaning into his embrace. I would live this life 1,000 times over, Thomas. Every joy, every hardship, every moment with you has been a gift. Thomas kissed the top of her head, his arms strong and sure around her despite the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes. You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, he said. Still the bravest. Still the one I choose, every single day. As the new century dawned in 1900, Clara stood with Thomas and their family and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The frightened mail-order bride who had clutched a Bible like a lifeline had become a woman of strength, purpose, and profound love. The lonely cowboy who had taken a chance on a stranger had become a husband, father, and grandfather whose legacy would endure for generations. The ranch sprawled across prime Montana land now, a testament to hard work and wise management. The children were all finding their own paths, all carrying forward the values of faith, family, and determination that Clara and Thomas had instilled in them. And through it all, the love between Clara and Thomas had remained the foundation on which everything else was built. When Clara and Thomas were old, their bodies worn by decades of ranch life but their spirits still vital, they would sit together on the porch they had sat on countless times before and watch the sun set over the mountains. Thomas would hold Clara's hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing, and Clara would rest her head on his shoulder, feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked her once during one of these quiet evenings. Clara thought about it, really thought about it, considering the roads not taken, the life she had left behind in Philadelphia, all the what-ifs and might-have-beens. And then she looked at Thomas, at this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for more than 40 years, and she smiled. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This life, this love was exactly what I was meant for. You were exactly who I was meant for." Thomas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I feel the same way. Every day with you has been a blessing, Clara, every single day." They lived long lives, Clara and Thomas Callahan, long enough to see their children established and successful, long enough to know a passel of grandchildren and even meet a few great-grandchildren. They lived long enough to see Montana grow from rough territory to settled state, to see the wild frontier become civilized ranch land, to witness the turn of a century and the dawning of a new era. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. The ranch endured, passing from Thomas to Jamie, who managed it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. The family remained close, bound by love and shared history. And Clara and Thomas's love for each other never dimmed, burning as bright in their twilight years as it had in those first passionate days of their marriage. When Thomas died in 1911 at the age of 73, passing peacefully in his sleep after a full day of working the ranch he loved, Clara was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it for more than 30 years. She wept for the loss of him, for the empty space he left in her life, but she did not despair. They had been blessed with decades together, with a love that most people only dreamed of, with a family and a legacy that would endure. Clara lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the house that Thomas had built. She spent her days tending her garden, reading her mother's Bible, and telling stories of the early days to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. She spoke often of Thomas, keeping his memory alive, making sure the younger generation understood what an extraordinary man their grandfather had been. When Clara's time came in 1916, she passed quietly in her sleep, much as Thomas had. Her children found her in the morning, her face peaceful, her mother's Bible open on the bedside table. And though they mourned, they also celebrated a life exceptionally well lived, a love that had built an enduring legacy. Clara and Thomas were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath the vast Montana sky they had both loved. Their headstone was simple but meaningful, carved with their names, their dates, and a single line that Jamie had chosen. Together they built a life of faith and love. The ranch continued under Jamie's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. Rose became a respected doctor and returned to Montana to practice, carrying on her mother's tradition of helping others. William's horse breeding program became known throughout the state. Grace married a musician and filled her home with the same joy and music that had characterized her childhood. And for generations, the descendants of Clara and Thomas Callahan told the story of how their family began. With a frightened young woman clutching a Bible, stepping off a stagecoach into an uncertain future, and a cowboy who had looked at her faith and called it beautiful. They told of a mail-order marriage that became a profound love story, of two lonely people who found in each other everything they had been searching for, of a partnership that built not just a successful ranch, but a family legacy that endured. The Bible that Clara had carried from Philadelphia remained in the family, passed down through the generations as a treasured heirloom. Each generation read from it the same passages Clara had read to her children, carrying on the faith that had sustained their family through hardship and blessed them with prosperity. And each generation remembered that their family's story began with courage, faith, and a love that proved strong enough to build an empire of the heart. In Redemption Creek, Montana, where the mountains still rose purple against the sky and the wind still whispered through the pines, the Callahan Ranch stood as a monument to what could be built when two people came together with nothing but hope and determination and love. The buildings had been updated and expanded, the land now supported hundreds of cattle, and modern equipment had replaced the backbreaking manual labor of earlier days. But the heart of the place remained the same, built on the foundation that Clara and Thomas had laid more than a century before. Their story became legend in the area, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But to their descendants, it was more than legend. It was a reminder of where they came from, of the strength and faith and love that ran in their blood. It was proof that taking a chance on love, even when that love seemed uncertain and risky, could lead to blessings beyond imagining. And so the legacy of Clara and Thomas Callahan lived on, not just in the land and buildings and cattle that bore their name, but in the hearts and lives of everyone who came after them. They had built something lasting, something beautiful, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had taken a chance on each other in the wild and unforgiving territory of Montana in 1879, and that chance had paid dividends for generations. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story that the Wild West was made for. Not easy, not simple, but real and profound and lasting. A love that had started with faith, grown through partnership, and endured through everything life could throw at it. A love that had built not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy, and a story worth telling for generations to come. And it all began with a young woman clutching a Bible, a cowboy who saw the beauty in her faith, and the courage to believe that love could bloom even in the harsh and unforgiving soil of the Montana frontier.